In this episode, we discuss drug use, mentions of sexual assault, and pedophilia. If these issues might upset you, please consider skipping this one. Welcome to Read It in Theaters, a podcast where I watch it.
And I read it, and then we talk about it.
And today, we're talking about Winter's Bone.
Mm-hmm.
Spoiler warning for all of Winter's Bone.
So, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first.
Okay.
I'll give a little synopsis. We'll do that. So, Winter's Bone was a book. When was it published? I didn't write that down.
I don't know.
Okay.
Let's find out.
Let's look that up real quick, and then I'll give a rundown.
Only the movie is coming up.
Oh, tight. Love that.
2006.
Okay. So Winter's Bone was published in 2006. It was written by Daniel Woodrell, and then in 2010, they adapted a very well-received movie, which was Jennifer Lawrence's big break.
I would love to watch this after we are done discussing it, because I just was imagining Jennifer Lawrence as Ree the whole time, and I would just really love to see her act this out.
I genuinely think that it is her best role. I don't think anything she's done since then has topped her performance in Winter's Bone, which I think is an unpopular opinion, because I know people love Jennifer Lawrence, and I mean, I think she's a great actress, but Winter's Bone I think she peaked, honestly.
Tell me the plot.
Okay, so the basic plot is it's set in Missouri, in the rural Ozark Mountains. And the main character, Ree, is a 17-year-old girl who finds out that her meth-dealing father has disappeared. He jumped bail and put up the house and the timberland that the family owns for his bond. And now he hasn't shown up for his court case. So she has to find him to either convince him to turn himself in or prove that he's dead in order to keep the family land.
Yeah. Right off the bat, it's not necessarily set in Missouri, like that is where the Ozarks are, but it's just set generally in the Ozarks for the book. And she's 16, but otherwise, yeah, same.
Okay.
Same plot.
All right. So the movie, I want to talk about some production things, because I think the production on this movie is incredible. So they set it in Missouri in 2 different counties. I'm dumb and I didn't write them down, so I don't remember which ones. But they filmed on location, and they hired multiple locals to be actors and part of the crew for the film.
Oh.
Which I think is really cool.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So in the little 45-minute making of featurette on the DVD, they do a little interview with William White, who plays Blonde Milton in the movie. And he talks about how the only thing he'd acted in before this was high school plays. And you would never know from his performance. He doesn't look like a nobody actor who doesn't know what he's doing. He does a fantastic job. And I think that him being from the Ozarks, just lends to that authenticity, because he didn't have to learn the accent or learn about the culture. He's living it.
I do think the authenticity is a huge sell in this, because the author, too, is from the Ozarks area. And so it just reads like someone intimately familiar with the whole thing.
Yes, which is why I think it's really cool that they hired so many locals, because it just sells that authenticity, where they weren't trying to fake it. They hired people who lived there, and they hired members of the Cook family who have owned land in the Ozarks since 1830. And they, the only thing it said about them in the featurette, the making of featurette, was that they helped film the lake scene. But it shows B-roll of their cattle and their land. And they hired members of the Beeson family to be animal wranglers and consultants, and as well as shooting on the Lawson family property and the Fox family property for, I believe, Ree's house, Sonia and Blonde Milton's house, and Teardrop and Thump Milton. They were all shot in people's actual homes.
Yeah, and that level of authenticity is not necessary in every single story.
No.
But especially for this book, where the setting is so important.
Yes.
It is a character in and of itself. To have that authenticity carried over into the movie is really cool and really important.
Yeah, and they really did that just with the B-roll and the location shots and everything. It's all filmed in such a way where you get a sense of what that area looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when it comes to stories about the Ozarks and the Appalachians, the really like poorer regions of the South that are so incredibly misunderstood and misrepresented.
But also so rich in
culture.
Yeah. And history. They've been there centuries.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to say, is that it's so easy for Hollywood to take those areas and those cultures and try to water them down to ignorance and poverty and
stereotypes,
and really just like, these are hillbillies and they don't matter as people. And I don't feel like the movie does that. I feel like every character, even the ones who are only there for a scene or two, are so rich, and they all have that history and that cultural tie to each other. And even though the area is really heavily impoverished, the setting for the movie is, they don't shoot it in a way that feels sensationalized or disrespectful. It's just, this is just fact. This is just how people are living, and there's no moral, like there's no morality placed on that. They're not good or bad people just for being poor.
I felt that way with the book too, where so many times it felt like it could be a poverty tour that sensationalizes it and monetizes it. And I think probably the author being from the area helps, but it was just, this is, there's no sensationalism. It's just, this is the lives they're living.
Exactly. And having grown up in a certain amount of poverty, I just really appreciate that, because even in my own experience of, I didn't grow up like, having to forage for my own food or anything, but like, I certainly didn't grow up middle class. Just talking about my own childhood and stuff, so often I come across people who I'll mention something about my childhood that to me is just a neutral experience that I had, but they act as though I was some deeply unfortunate person to have had whatever poverty experience I had, and it feels very othering and gross to be treated that way. And so I really like that the movie and the book too doesn't do that to these people.
Yeah, because growing up with a certain level of poverty, that's just how things are.
Exactly.
And it's not necessarily traumatizing.
Exactly.
I was trying to think, I don't think I even tasted beef until I was like 13, because we ate game meat.
Right, because you grew up with a father who was a hunter-gatherer.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't. So I had like processed food from the grocery store and stuff, but you know, it's like, we also grew up in an area where we lived on well water and regularly lost power if there was a thunderstorm.
Right.
Which also meant that we lost water.
Yes.
And to me, that's just, I don't think of that as like a traumatic thing. It's not like, oh, I was so poor that we didn't have water if the power went out, or the power would go out for like a week at a time. It's just like, that happened.
Well, and you just dealt with it. Like, the power would go out for a week at a time, and it'd be like, okay, well, I guess we're taking cold showers this week. It's a bummer, but it's like any kind of, like living with chronic pain. Like, it's a bummer, and I wish that it wasn't how things are for some people, but it's not the end of the world.
Yeah. Yeah, so I like the way that the movie portrays poverty as just sort of a neutral state. Like, obviously there are struggles, but it's not like the worst possible state that a person can be in. And one thing that I really love is the movie opens with just sort of a little montage of Rhee and her two younger siblings just kind of going about their daily life. And it shows sort of Rhee's specific struggles with her situation in ways without having to blatantly state it. And interspersed with those things where it's like, yeah, obviously this is a really hard thing that Rhee is dealing with, it just shows the kids like on the trampoline and laughing and having fun. And it shows just the joy of existing, despite how poor they are. And that was, I I don't know. I think it's a really good opening just because it does showcase, like, this is the setting and this is the situation for our main character. So one of the first things it shows is her taking an old Tupperware out of the fridge, and she sniffs the food that's in it, decides that it's not good for people to eat, but then they feed it to their dog.
Yeah.
And so that automatically showcases that they struggle with food. It then shows her, like, walking her siblings to school. So we now know they don't have a car. And then it shows a couple of moments with her sort of at the school, having just dropped her siblings off. And it shows her, like, looking into classrooms in sort of a longing way. And so then you know automatically Ree isn't in school anymore and she wants to be.
Yeah.
So right from the first 5 minutes of the film, you know this is a girl who has had to make really severe sacrifices for the sake of her siblings and for her family.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, it just keeps showing moments like that where, like, she gives the family horse away to the neighbor because they can't feed the horse anymore. And then you see the neighbors skinning a deer in their front yard, and Ree's brother Sonny asks if they should go over and ask for some deer meat, and Ree automatically says never ask for what ought to be offered.
Yeah. And that of those examples you listed, that one is the only one that's also in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's interesting the way that things get showcased in different mediums, because they don't have a horse or dogs or any of that in the book, but there's different ways to show that they're struggling that are internal and hard to show in this different medium.
Yeah.
It's a lot of it is Ree's internal thoughts about the sacrifices that she's had to make. So, you know, it's interesting that they've changed it and good, because a lot of people get mad when it's like, she never walks the boys to school.
Right. Oh,
Sometimes
so does she have two younger brothers in the book?
She does.
Okay,
Yes.
so in the movie, it's a brother and a sister.
Oh, interesting.
And I think that they made that change because the sister, her name is Ashley, but she's also played by a local girl whose name really is Ashley.
Interesting.
So I think they probably made that change just because they found this, like, child actor locally who was doing such a great job that they were like, well, I guess it's a sister now.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, and she does do a really good job. She's a good child actress. And again, the authenticity, because this is just her life. Like, they shot, I believe, in her home. So she looks very natural there because that's where she lives.
Yeah, in the book, it's Sonny and Harold.
Oh, okay. I vaguely remember that. I read the book 10 years ago.
And the only thing I think that changes with making it a sister is that there is a small amount of emphasis on Harold being more gentle. And I think it's important to showcase boys being able to be gentle.
Yeah.
And with it being a girl, that's quote unquote expected. But
so in the movie, they put that on Sonny.
Okay.
There's a scene in the movie where Ree is teaching them how to hunt squirrels. And after they've killed some, she is having Sonny help her skin and gut one of the squirrels, and he doesn't want to touch the guts. And she says, Sonny, there's a lot of stuff you're going to have to get over being scared of. And his response is, I'm not scared, I just don't want to.
Yeah, and that's Harold's line. That happens in the book, but it's Harold.
Yeah. So they gave that stuff to Sonny in the movie to show him as sort of a gentle boy and he's, like, very quiet and thoughtful in the movie. Again, I just think every character is so well thought out and so nuanced that, like, we don't really know that much about Sonny, but we know that he's a sweet, gentle boy who is just living his life.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, and they don't necessarily show Harold as being quiet and thoughtful, but there are those little things, like he doesn't want to touch the squirrel guts. He wants to put out food for the coyotes because you can hear them crying and how hungry they are.
That's sweet.
Yeah. It talks a little bit about them getting into fights at school, and Harold always comes back beaten up when they get in fights. I mean, not like really beaten up.
But. Yeah, but obviously Harold is the one who gets picked on.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, so they definitely did a little bit of that with Sonny in the movie. So another thing about the characterization that I really like is how all the characters interact with each other and how the culture of the poverty and the rural atmosphere plays into that. So, like, their next door neighbors are Sonia and blonde Milton.
Mm-hmm.
And they do, like, bring over some of their deer meat for Ree, and they let her know that she can use the wood splitter in their backyard, and they take in the horse and all that. So they're helping in the ways that they can. But the way that they interact is very, like, we're helping because we're neighbors and it's neighborly and we all live in this similar situation. But they're also very, like, overprotective and wary.
Mm-hmm.
So in the early parts of the film, I think just in, like, the first or second scene, a police officer shows up to tell Ree that her father has jumped bail and that he put the house and the land up for his bond, and if he doesn't come back, they're going to be
Introduces
homeless.
our conflict.
Right. So he shows up, re-talks with him, and then he leaves. But the whole time he's there, you see Sonia and blonde Milton in their front yard watching.
Yeah.
And then later, when Sonia brings over some of the deer meat, she immediately says, "Oh, we saw that the law was out here today." And then sort of weirdly interrogates Ree for a minute about what she may have told the police officer. And Ree says, that she wouldn't have told him anything even if she knew it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like Sonia has to, like, double check that Ree is still on their side and still going to keep the sort of culture of silence and the distrust of the law that exists in their area.
So again, I think that it's interesting. They do have the conversation about Ree not talking to the cops, but they don't explicitly say that Blonde and Sonia are watching the interaction. But they do have other overprotective things that happen. But again, it's like internal and things that would be hard to show on film. So it sounds like it was a really good translation.
Yeah, I think it was. And then later, Ree pretty much immediately then goes to talk to her uncle, who goes by Teardrop.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I loved about showcasing this relationship was that this is Ree's, you find out later, this is Ree's closest relation in their area. And his partner, Victoria, comes out of the house to greet her. But what she says is essentially, "What brought you up here?" And then she said, "Is somebody dead?" So again, there's that, like, with so few words, we now know immediately that Rhea is not close with these people.
Mm-hmm.
And she's very clearly nervous. Throughout her whole interaction with her Uncle Teardrop, she's obviously afraid. And no one will give her any straight answers, which is, again, just this culture of silence that is like, how much is related to we don't want to deal with the law because we're poor and the law isn't good to poor people, or how much of it is we're all cooking and selling and doing meth and we don't want to talk to the police because of that. But no one will give her a straight answer. And one of the bits of dialogue, I assume that this was in the book because it's just such a good piece of dialogue. But she asks, wouldn't her father be maybe with little Arthur, just a character that's mentioned. And she says, ain't we all related? Like, like everyone here is somehow related. And Teardrop says, our relations get pretty thin between here and little Arthur. So that just shows this sort of undercurrent of backstory that you never really get much clarification on in the film, where just somehow they're all vaguely related, but some relations are better than others.
Yeah, so that is something that I want to bring up with Blonde Milton, because I don't know if it's ever expressly stated in the movie. His name is Milton Dolly.
Mm-hmm.
They're pretty much all Dollys. Like, there's a few other last names in there. But the reason that he's called Blonde Milton, or there's also Thump Milton and etc., is that they're just all named like Milton, Arthur, Jessup, and Haslam.
Okay.
And like there's a couple other names that some people have, but like they make a point of saying that if you have one of those names, you're kind of locked into this life because those are family names and there's expectations, which I thought was really interesting.
That is really interesting. They never expressly say that in the film, but they do. Blonde Milton as a character and Thump Milton as a character.
Yeah. And actually Sonny's name is Jessup.
Oh,
but he goes by Sonny because
Jessup was their father.
Well, and there's a billion Jessups.
Right.
But yeah, Jessup was their father. And it says, I forget the exact quote, but there's a line in there that's something like, Mom and Ree shouted down Harold being named Milton because they didn't want him to be stuck in this life, and she wishes that she had shouted for Sonny more because he's named Jessup, so he's locked into this life, but Harold has a chance to like make his own life because he's not named Milton, so he can do anything.
That's really interesting.
I also thought that it was interesting, back to your point of them all being related, when she goes to see Sump Milton, she introduces herself as I'm a Dolly, and then her first name, and then, like, through conversation with the woman that answers the door, lists more of her relations.
Oh, that's really
She's like,
interesting.
Jessup is my father. My mom was Connie Bromont, I think. I can't read my own handwriting. My mom used to be Connie Bromont.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that scene in the movie where she meets Thump's partner. I don't know if they're married or not, but her name's Marab. I don't know if it ever says that in the book.
It does. I think they call her Mrs. Thump a couple times.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
She only gets addressed by name once in the movie, but her name is Marab. But the scene where Ree goes and speaks to her, I think is one of the strongest scenes in the film. Just purely because of the acting, honestly. I mean, the script is great too, but just the actress who plays Marab, Dale Dickey, is so fucking good. Just so fucking good. And there's actually there was a deleted bit of dialogue from that scene where Ree introduces herself by saying, "My dad's Jessup," and Marab responds with, "Which Jessup would that be?" But that scene is still really good because Ree basically makes her case, and Marab's response from the get-go is, "Ain't you got no men could do this for you?"
Mm-hmm.
Which, again, just another great way to show this culture, and just, you know, without having to expressly say anything, you just learn something from that line.
Yeah.
Talk to me about Ree. What's she like in the book?
I mean, from the little that you've said, the same. Like,
Okay.
she's just a strong character. She reminds me a little bit of, I should have looked this up. I can't remember her name. The main character from Futuristic Violence and Fancy Suits by David Wong.
Okay.
Where there are, like, exactly two female characters I've read that don't engage super hard with traditional femininity.
Mhm.
Like, Ree wears dresses, which she never wears anything but dresses in the book. I don't know about the movie.
She wears jeans in the movie. She never wears a dress once.
She doesn't even own jeans. It's the middle of winter, snow up to her knees. She goes out in a dress. Like, she refuses
love
to wear
that.
Right? So, like, there is that amount of femininity, but, you know, she chops wood and hunts and shoots guns and goes on this quest to either find her body or her father's body or, you know, to drag him back for bail or to prove that he's dead. And that's a man thing, you know, traditionally.
Right.
And so Ree and the main character from the David Wong book are the only two female characters I've ever read that aren't bemoaning the fact that they have to do men's stuff kind of thing.
Yeah.
And, like, it's mentioned a couple times, ain't there a man that can do this for you, that kind of stuff, but it's never, like, really enforced by the narrative in any way. Because sometimes you'll run into female characters that do quote-unquote boy stuff and then are punished by it in the narrative, or they have people really pushing back against it.
Right.
Other characters that are like, no, you can't be doing that, and try to, like, stop them from doing that kind of stuff. And with Ree, she's allowed to just do it because it needs doing.
Right. That's one thing I really love about her character is just, this has to be done.
Yeah.
And so she's going to do it.
Yeah.
No matter the fact that her family and the people surrounding her are all saying, shut up and keep your head down, don't get involved.
Yeah.
To her, the conflict has nothing to do with the meth or the police or the poverty or any of it. It's just she's going to be homeless.
Yeah.
Her mother is severely mentally ill and she has 2 young siblings, and the only option for her is to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yep.
And I love that.
There's a scene where, I don't know if Gail is in the movie.
She is, yeah.
Her best friend, and I think they sleep together, not positive. They definitely make out at one point. But best friend
Yeah.
is over at the house for reasons. And the bond officer comes along to be like, yeah, your dad missed his court date, and so we're going to be taking the house back. You have probably 30 days is my guess. Or I guess you could prove he's dead, because a dead person can't show up to court. And Gail just says, I heard the last thing he said, Sweet Pea, and don't you do it. I know the way you are, how you go about things, and I'm saying don't you go back there to Thump Milton to get answers.
Mm-hmm.
And Ree fell as much as sat on the top step, knees wide, chin down, and said, how else is it going to happen? And that's just kind of her character in a nutshell. She doesn't really want to be doing this. She's aware that it's dangerous, it's hard, but it's that or sleeping in a field.
Right. And that is something, not to that extreme, but that notion of just this has to get done because the alternative just isn't an option is something that I also relate to, having just grown up super poor all of the time.
Yeah.
Like there's certain situations where it's like you just have to do it no matter what.
Right.
Something that I love too along that same vein is towards the end of the book, Ree ends up sort of getting like quote unquote, I'd say like I guess they try to put her in her place, but it's done by the women of the clan. Yes. So it's Merib and her sisters and a girl named Megan.
The book too. Yeah.
Right. So I don't know if this piece of dialogue is in the book, but basically they kick the shit out of her, and then one of the women says, "What are we going to do with you?" Because she won't stop asking questions. And Ree's response is, "Well, kill me, I guess."
Yep.
Because to her, it's like, that's the choice.
Yeah.
Like, she will not stop because she does not have another option. The only way they're going to get her to shut up is to kill her.
Yep.
And then too, they say, well, basically say, we discussed that. We decided we're not going to kill you. And Ree says, well, then help me. No one's tried that yet.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty much, it might be worded slightly differently in the book, but that pretty much happens.
Yeah, which, I just love that. I love that she's just this very stalwart heroine.
Yeah.
And a lot of her character, but also the way that Jennifer Lawrence plays her as just, she doesn't have a whole lot of expression. She's very much like, she's serious, she's weighing her options, she makes her choices and she sticks to them. And in all of her interactions with people, she's a girl of very few words.
Yeah.
And it reminds me so much of like early 2000s, like Clint Eastwood.
Yeah. I saw a lot of people that were like, this is just True Grit.
I haven't seen True Grit, so I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I love that she's like an old Western hero.
Yeah.
But then placed in a totally different situation in a different time period than classic Westerns, but she behaves that way, where it's just,
absolutely,
she makes the hard choices and she does the things she has to do, and she's not going to spare words for it.
Well, in presenting her choices in such a harsh way, the whole how else is it going to get done thing, that is very old Western.
Yes.
Where you're in these dire straits and your choices are shoot your way out or die.
Right.
And that's
more or less like where Rhea is at.
Yeah, that's more or less what her choices boil down to, which really interesting. Really, like I was saying, I've only ever read 2 female characters that are successfully done in that manner.
Yeah, I think I've really only encountered Rhea Dolly, but something that I love too is Rhea's silence, or her like, she doesn't mince words, but part of that is because of the sort of culture of silence of, we're all meth heads and meth dealers, so we don't talk about certain things. And like when the first time she talks to Merib even says Thump doesn't want to talk to her because Thump doesn't want witnesses.
Yeah.
And so there's that obviously playing into the way that Ree is as a person, but I also think that part of it is her own internal code of ethics that isn't expressly stated in the film, but she has no need for gossip. And that's so clear with her as a character, even when all of this shit is going down and it becomes clear that other people in the area are starting to talk and they're saying unkind things about Merib and Thump Milton. Ree never says anything to anyone.
Yeah.
She just isn't that person. She's not going to go bemoaning her troubles. She's fucking handling it.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a line in the book to that point that I probably can't find quickly, but it was just something to the effect of, I didn't say a thing about you. And Merib was like, I know you didn't, because you wouldn't do that.
Yeah, that's in the movie too. There's also a thing where after she gets the shit kicked out of her, Teardrop shows up to get her.
Yeah.
And takes responsibility for her. And basically Thump Milton is like, she's yours to answer for. If she does wrong, it's on you. And Teardrop just says, that's a girl who's not going to tell anybody anything.
Yeah, and that too. I love the, it just feels so genuine, the clannishness of when you get a really small town like that.
Yeah.
If she does anything, it's your problem. Like, it feels correct.
Yeah, the whole thing just feels so painfully authentic.
Yes. I want to talk about a little bit the writing, because I wrote this down, and as I was writing it down, I'm like, this sounds really try hard, but the thing is, the whole book is written like this. So it felt really genuine at the time, but I think it really showcases the way that it was written, because after Sump picks her up, she has to vomit, and he says, well, vomit out the window then, because only they don't use the word vomit.
Thump or Teardrop?
Sorry, yeah, Teardrop, not Thump.
Okay.
And so it says, she thrust her head into the cold and broadcast the hot mush of old swallowed food toward the snowbanks.
Ew.
Yeah, but, broadcast.
Right.
Reading that out of context sounds really try hard, but the whole book was written in that way, so it really didn't feel that way within the book. But
yeah,
it was really written in an interesting way.
I wonder how much of that is Ozark dialect sort of influencing the way that Woodrell writes.
Yeah, that's how it felt.
Which I really like, because again, that area is so rich in history and culture.
Mm-hmm.
And they do have a distinct dialect of English.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, there was not much Ozark English in the movie, probably for the sake of making sure that everyone could understand it.
Yeah.
But I do wish that there had been more colloquialisms and things like that, just because it would be even more authentic.
Yeah. Well, Lord knows it needs more authenticness.
Authenticity?
Authenticity. That's
Words.
the word.
Yeah, I did see, because I was curious, I don't know that much about Ozark culture. Mm-hmm. And obviously this is just showing one version of what it can be like to live in that area. And the Ozarks are huge too. Oh. So this was just, a portion of the Ozarks in Missouri. So I actually did a quick little internet search to see if I could find anyone from Missouri and the Ozarks talking about the film.
Mm-hmm.
And I found a Quora question where someone asked, is the rural Ozarks as miserable as pictured in Winter's Bone? And there are multiple answers from people basically saying yes and no. That it totally depends on where you live, it depends on your situation, but that yes, it can be that bad. And one woman even said that she was married twice, and in her first marriage was middle class and lived in a very nice area and did not have those kinds of struggles. But with her second marriage was heavily impoverished and ended up having to move like 40 miles away from a grocery store. Mm-hmm. And then for her, that did become her life, where she was gardening to get her food. It wasn't just a hobby. Mm-hmm. And there were drug addicts living nearby. That's just how it is. So it seems to be more or less accurate. I did see one Facebook post from a guy who wrote 10 things Winter's Bone got wrong about the Ozarks.
I saw that too, but I didn't read it very close.
I read it, and then I looked at a lot of the comments, and a lot of the comments were disagreeing with him. Which again, I don't know that much, so I'm not going to say he's wrong. But I did want to note that some of the things that he said, just for my own sake of defending filmmaking, some of his complaints were like, nobody's eating fast food, and how come nobody ever goes to a Walmart and stuff? And it was an indie film.
Yeah.
Like, they don't have the money to pay royalties to brand names to have a pile of empty KFC boxes outside of a house.
Yeah.
And it was shot on location, so I would argue that like if the people in that area were eating fast food, there would have been evidence of it in the film.
Yep.
So that was one complaint. One thing he stated that I do think could be considered an oversight depending on when the film is set, which it never expressly says, is he said, why is nobody on food stamps? How come no one's on disability? Like, Ree's mother is obviously disabled. Why aren't they getting disability money?
Well, like you were saying, it could depend on when it's set. But another thing is there's an interview with the author in the version of the book that I read, and he said, I've lived in plenty of places besides the Ozarks, but the Ozarks and many of its values of the place are anchored deep within me. Values like it's better to be poor than be beholden. Which definitely speaks to whether or not you would be on food stamps, because there's a misconception that being on food stamps is being beholden to the government when there's the whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality. And I'm certainly not going to knock anyone for that being their culture, although I disagree with the sentiment.
Right.
But that seems to me would be why. You don't go on food stamps. You don't deal with authority if you don't absolutely have to.
Yeah, I get that.
I saw that Facebook post also. I didn't read it close because it wasn't what I was looking for. There's a scene where she goes to a set of caves. So when she leaves Thump Milton's the first time, she'd hitchhiked a bit and caught a ride on the school bus to get there. The school bus driver says something to the effect of, Lord knows most places around here are too far to walk to. Something like that.
Yeah.
But she does have to walk back from Thump Milton's, and by the time she leaves there, it's going on dark, and it's snowing. Again, dead of winter. Snowing, ice everywhere. So she stops by these caves, and it goes into this bit of culture about Haslam and the fruit of belief and the fist of God, and how there was a religious following here that fell apart. She's not sure on the details. And then her ancestors lived in these caves for a while. And so she goes up there to get out of the weather and start a fire and get warm. And so I Googled fruit of belief because I wanted to know the story on that, because she doesn't. I was real curious, and there's just nothing as far as I could tell. I couldn't find anything about it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I might try again later, but I was searching for a while trying to find, and there was nothing as far as I could tell. So on the off chance we have listeners and you know something about it, I'm deeply curious.
On the off chance we have any listeners at all.
Yeah.
I do, I wouldn't be surprised if that was fiction for the sake of enriching the world.
Yeah.
But I also wouldn't be surprised if that exists and there is no internet record of it, because a lot of, I guess, current settlements in the Ozarks, I do think were founded in the 1800s. And that was around the time that a lot of new religion utopia groups were springing up.
Yeah.
And settling in that area. That's when Mormonism started. And the Jehovah's Witnesses, I believe, too. So there were a lot of groups like that didn't catch on the way that they did.
Yeah, and that was the sound of it to me. But you would think that there would still be some history of that, even if it is mostly an oral history. Those kind of things seem like they would have migrated to the internet by now, but, I don't know.
I don't know. Who's to say? We don't live in an area rich with white people history.
Yeah. Since I've brought up the caves anyway, I do want to talk about, I think there was a theme of rebirth within this book.
Yeah, tell me about that. You mentioned it before, and I don't really pick that up in the movie.
So there are several scenes that I would say categorize rebirth. And the first one is this scene in the cave where she spends the night there, and because it's been snowing and her clothes are all wet and covered in ice, she strips naked to warm up by the fire and let her clothes dry out. And then the next morning, it's much warmer now. What's it say? The air at dawn was warmer than any day had been for a week. The landscape was softening some, but not to much. A freight passed on the tracks beyond the field and whisked the path clear. She stood in sunlight and stretched, a great long body pale and twisting at the brink of a cave. She walked to water dripping from the rock above the cave mouth, cupped her hands to the trickle, and drank deeply of the falling new water. She also, in the night, curls into a ball, more or less the fetal position. So again, so it's just very much rebirth.
Yeah.
And I think
I like that there's not to cut you off, but I'm going to cut you off.
Go ahead.
I like that scene sort of ties her to nature.
Yes.
It's the history of her people having lived in these caves, but also she's there still connected to those caves.
Exactly. And so there's two scenes that I would say are the most clear rebirth scenes. And it's that one, and before that she's looking for her father and is confident that he's still alive. After that, she's intent on finding his body. And then the second scene that I would say represents rebirth is again, so that first one's about a third of the way through. The next one is about 2/3 of the way through. And her and Gail go to a spring. It's after she's had the shit beat out of her. And they go to this spring that's supposed to make her feel better. And strip naked and dip into the spring. And then afterwards, she's no longer looking for her father's dead body because she had the shit beat out of her. She's just kind of accepted her fate. We're going to get kicked out of the house, and that sucks.
Huh. That's interesting.
So there's this shift in motivation and tone.
Yeah. I think the only thing that mirrors that in the film is after she gets the shit kicked out of her and Teardrop basically takes responsibility for her. There's a brief scene where it shows Ree digging things out of the closet and going through her mom and dad's old stuff. And she asks her mom, even though her mom doesn't really speak or seem to respond, she still puts things in her mom's lap and says, go through this and tell me what you want to keep. And that in some way kind of mirrors, like, here's the past and Rhea is disposing of it because the future is homelessness.
Yeah.
So there is sort of that same vein of, like, she has accepted that she's done all she can do.
Yeah. I guess we could also say when, what's her name? Mrs. Thump?
Marib
shows up and is like, we're going to fix all your problems for you. And takes her to her father's body so they can cut off the hands and give it to the authorities. I could also argue that that is a kind of rebirth because there's first the darkness of they put a burlap sack over her head. And then they get to the pond where he's been tied to an engine block. Yeah. And she digs around in there to pull his hands up so they can cut him off, and at one point falls in. And so again, you have this completely submerged in water, gets all wet, and then climbs out and gets naked because it's the dead of winter and she's freezing. So, and again, so you have the looking for her father, then accepted that he's dead, looking for his body, accepted that they're going to be homeless, and then again, you have this dipped in water, and then they're not going to be homeless now because they have proof that he was dead, and so they're not going to lose the house and, in fact, get some money out of it.
Yeah, that's really cool. I like that parallel. Or that through line, rather, of every time there's a tonal shift in the story, Rhea essentially goes through a metaphorical baptism.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. So it never says in the movie, and I'm not super good at picking up on subtext, so I don't know if I just missed this, that I was supposed to like infer the answers to these questions. But it never says in the movie who put up the extra money for Jessup's bail.
Mm-hmm.
So it's stated that the house and the land didn't cover his bail, and some mysterious man showed up to the bail bonds office and put a bag of crumpled money on the table.
Yes.
And it never says who that is in the movie. And it also never says who killed Jessup.
Yes.
And I've seen this movie like 4 times, and only on this recent rewatch did my brain connect that probably the guy who put up the money is the guy who killed Jessup.
That was, well, it could be that I don't know if I'm better at picking up subtext, but that
I
was
think you are.
my assumption. And that also happens in the book, which is where they get the money from. The bail
Yes.
officer comes around and is like, if he's dead, then he can't, it's not skipping bail to be dead. So
Right.
we're not going to take the house, and here's the money because the guy that left it didn't leave his name. He's not going to come back for it. So that makes it yours.
Yeah, that happens in the movie too.
Yeah, and it never expressly says, I don't know if we're supposed to be able to guess. I kind of don't think so. Teardrop guesses.
Right.
There's a scene where he says something about if Rhea ever finds out who killed her father, don't tell him because he'll lose it and kill that guy. That's his little brother.
Right.
And so in the end of the book, the bail officer comes around, gives her the money, and Teardrop goes and paces on the porch. And as soon as the bail officer leaves, he's like, I know who did it, and also leaves. But I don't know if we're supposed to be able to guess. I didn't.
Yeah, I couldn't figure it out. I looked it up because I was like, are we supposed to know? And there's no way to know for sure from the movie, but I did see some people saying there's a character in the book who's mentioned that didn't make it into the movie, Sleepy John.
If he's mentioned, it's one time.
Okay, yeah, I don't know. People were saying that they think it's Sleepy John because when the bail bond officer shows up, he gives a brief description of the guy who brought in the money and says that his eyes looked sort of sleepy. So people are saying that you're supposed to infer that it's Sleepy John, and because Teardrop overhears that description, he knows immediately who it is.
I guess that makes sense. I just kind of thought it was supposed to be one of those things where you just don't know, and you have to be okay with that.
That's kind of what I thought too. And I'm generally okay not knowing. I just was curious if I was supposed to know.
Right. Well, in a story like this where there's so much interconnection and it's so small town, it almost doesn't matter.
Right. And I always thought that the person who gave the money was Teardrop.
Oh, I didn't think that because it's made clear in the book, at least, that the reason someone gave the rest of the bail money is because Jessup is a snitch, and they needed him out of jail so they could kill him.
Yeah, that's never, again, that might be something I'm supposed to understand from the movie, and I just didn't pick up on it, but that's never expressly stated in the movie. You do find out that he's a snitch. So yeah, I guess thinking about it, it wouldn't make that much sense for Teardrop to have gotten him out of jail, but I guess just the fact that Teardrop is like one of the only well fleshed out, really involved characters in the film. My brain just sort of automatically is like, oh, well, if the person who put up the money is supposed to be important, I'm going to link it to obviously the most important male character, who's Teardrop.
Makes sense.
And in the film, when the bail bond officer shows up at the end, Teardrop is really squirrely. Like, he sees that car pull up and he doesn't want to look at the guy, and he like turns away and stops talking. And the bail bond officer gets out of his car, looks directly at Teardrop and says, I know you. And Teardrop goes, yep. And then he turns away and doesn't say anything else.
Oh.
So, and again, like it could just be another way that they're saying these people who live in this region are heavily, not heavily, I guess, like they deal with the law regularly. And therefore, maybe Teardrop just knows the bail bond officer because maybe Teardrop had to put up bail at some point.
Yeah.
Because, like, they know the police officer and, like, it's very clear that everyone knows everyone.
Yeah.
So it might not mean anything, but initially, upon the first couple times I saw the film, I was like, oh, this is probably Teardrop. But yeah, now that you've pointed it out, it doesn't really make sense for it to be him.
Yeah. And that, let me find it. There it is. Okay, so he sees Teardrop. He says, I know you, don't I? Teardrop says, yep, Mike, ain't it? Crick's boy. I've known old Crick since my whiskers came in fuzzy.
Okay.
So, yeah, it sounds like it's very mysterious and you should read into it in the movie, but it is not like that at all in the book. It's just, this is a small town where everybody knows everybody, especially when it's
Yeah,
tangled with the law.
exactly. Yeah, that's probably what it is in the film. But maybe could have been done a little better.
Yeah, sounds like.
But yeah, I do like that they leave other people's stories open-ended. Like in the end of the movie, Ree has her family. She's accomplished her goal. They're not going to be homeless.
Yep.
And she even has a little cushion of money to get them by while she figures out what her next move is.
Yep.
But you have no idea what happens to anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Teardrop apparently knows who killed Jessup. Presumably, he's going to go murder that guy. Which presumably means that Teardrop is also going to be murdered,
Yep.
and it'll be a blood feud.
Yep.
But in the movie, at least, there's a very clear progression of Ree and Teardrop's relationship going from this very antagonistic, we're related, but we don't care about each other,
Yeah.
to like, Teardrop speaks for her and he says she's the only close relation I got left.
Absolutely.
And it's sort of like then they're a team trying to find out where Jessup is.
Yeah, and it's clear that Teardrop wants revenge for her beating.
Yeah, it's not so clear in the film, but he just seems like a guy who wants revenge.
In general, yeah.
But he goes through a pretty profound character change in the movie from just this very like angry, unstable person to a more high functioning drug user. And he's still by no means a good guy,
Right.
but he clearly comes to care for his nieces and nephew. Like
Yeah.
in the end of the film, he brings over baby chicks for Ashley and Sonny to raise. And he sits and he plays Jessup's banjo for a while. Like he just comes to visit.
Yeah.
And that's hugely different from, he was asleep when Ree showed up and his partner comes out of the house and says, oh, is somebody dead?
Yeah.
That in just this short period of time, he has decided that he cares about family now.
Well, and the way that he's presented initially is he's scary, so scary.
Yeah, he's terrifying.
We don't talk to him because he's terrifying.
He's terrifying, and he probably killed the guy at some point.
Oh, he definitely killed a guy at some point.
Yeah, he's scary as fuck. And Ree, even in the movie, Ree even says at one point, "You've always scared me," and Teardrop responds with, "That's because you're smart."
Yep, that happens in the book too.
Yeah, so it's like he goes through a pretty profound character change, and because he's shown to care now about family, and he obviously wants to help Ree and her siblings in some way. Even when he says that he knows who killed Jessup, and so you immediately go, oh, well, fuck, that means Teardrop's going to die.
Yeah.
There's also a little bit of ambiguity where Ree doesn't want him to act on revenge.
Yeah.
And in the movie, at least, it's kind of a quiet moment where he just says he knows. And he still has Jessup's banjo in his hands, and she says, you should have that. And Teardrop says, keep it at the house for me. So there's this sort of awkward, like, it's almost like he hasn't really made up his mind if he's going to kill someone or not, because he's now torn between caring for his niece and wanting to be there as an uncle versus his drive to have revenge for Jessup.
Yeah.
So even that, you don't really know what Teardrop decides to do in the end. You don't know what happens to him.
Yeah, and it's not expressly stated that he's trying to get revenge, but it's very much implied. And the implication earlier in the book is that he knows that it would be stupid and that he'd be killed for it, but he wouldn't be able to help it.
Yes. Yeah, it's like that in the movie. But yeah, it's all very interesting. I like the way that all of the characters interact and play off of each other.
Yes.
And I like that, I would say maybe only one, really. One character in the movie, I think, is portrayed as just absolutely unredeemable sleazebag.
Is it Little Arthur?
It sure is Little Arthur.
What a surprise! Yeah, Little Arthur. Okay, trigger warning for rape and pedophilia.
Yep.
It is expressly stated that Little Arthur raped her earlier in this year.
Yeah, that is not in the movie,
Okay.
but I do remember that from the book.
Yeah.
And he is an absolute fucking creep in the movie, but they don't go into any history that the two have.
Okay. Yeah, it's very brief. What happens in the book is they were kind of hiding out at their house in the spring, or at Ree's house. Jessup was also there, Little Arthur, a couple other characters. And Little Arthur gives her a handful of mushrooms and says that it will make bologna taste like how gold looks. And
The fuck?
yeah, and she eats them and then is super high because it's mushrooms, and then goes up into the hills because she has to be in nature, and he follows her up there and rapes her.
Yeah, that's horrible.
Yeah.
And it definitely adds an extra layer of discomfort, but also resilience to Ree's character when she has to then go speak to Little Arthur.
Yes.
Yeah, that's not in the movie. Probably just because there isn't a whole lot of backstory discussed in the movie. Again, there's like no wasted space.
Yeah.
It's really like, it's a forward trajectory throughout the whole film. So I don't think it was cut out for any particular reason other than time, and just it doesn't necessarily add to that forward trajectory, so it's not in the movie.
Yeah.
But he's the only character who just from the get-go is the absolute fucking worst, and his behavior is much less of we don't talk about those things because we don't, and much more like belligerent in the way that he talks to Ree.
Yeah, he isn't super sleazy on, I guess, in the moment in the book. There's the flashback. But I do think it's very telling that she finds Megan first and essentially says that she's going to see Little Arthur. And Megan is pretend casual and is like, oh, I'm going with you. And it makes it clear that you don't let women go see Little Arthur alone.
Ah, that's so gross.
Right. And it's never expressly stated, but just like the way that Megan says that she's going with her when they've apparently never met before is just, oh yeah, if you're going to see Little Arthur, another person is going with you, end of story.
Yeah. She does go with her in the movie. Does she say in the book, does she warn Ree to leave if Little Arthur's been on meth for a few days?
Yes.
Yeah, because I thought that was really telling of his character, too. He's also the only character who's shown to be what I believe is the tweaking phase. I'm not super familiar with all the phases of meth use, but he's obviously paranoid, very jumpy, very sweaty. And all of the other characters, the only other character that it shows use drugs is Teardrop. And all of his drug use in the movie appears to be like maintenance drug use. Whereas Little Arthur is shown as being in the throes of a really like violent portion of addiction. I guess. I don't know if I'm being as sensitive to this topic as I should be, but they're shown to use drugs in different ways. And Little Arthur is obviously more volatile because of his drug use than Teardrop is.
Yeah, I don't know if that translates exactly in the book, but through the internal narration, it definitely does.
Well, and like Teardrop is volatile, but it seems to be more just Teardrop's life experience has made him volatile.
Yeah.
Whereas, like Megan saying, if Little Arthur's been on crank for 2 days, you just need to leave because it's the crank that makes him like that.
Yeah.
Or at least makes it worse. Because obviously crank doesn't turn you into a rapist.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's the only character that is like, wow, fuck Little Arthur, I hate him.
Yeah.
Everyone else is like, they're like doing what they do to get by.
Yeah.
And they're not bad people.
Even Mrs. Thump, who beats, along with other people, beats Ree. It's not vilified, really. Like, it kind of is, but it's more just like, yeah, Ree's sticking her nose in where it doesn't belong, and Ree has very good reasons for doing so, but it's not just them being nasty.
Yeah, there was a really interesting behind-the-scenes moment where it was the director, Jennifer Lawrence, Dale Dickey, and then the two actresses, I did not write down their names, but the two actresses who play Merib's sisters, who were the women in the film who beat Ree, kind of discussing how that scene was going to go, where Ree shows up and the women attack her. And Dale Dickey says something about, like, her character just being so angry that Rhea is still asking questions that she has to do something violent.
Yeah.
And then one of the women who plays one of the sisters speaks up and says, well, Rhea should have known. She knew it was an unspoken rule. She knew not to come back, and she came back anyway. So this has to happen.
It wasn't even unspoken in the book. They expressly tell her, don't come back. And she does.
It's unspoken in the film, but yeah, it's just it's like that's how things are done.
Yeah.
And that too, there's also after the beating, when Teardrop shows up to get Ree, you know, he says that thing about what Jessup did was against our ways, and I know that.
Yeah.
So even he's like, he's pissed that Jessup is dead, but he also knows that there's a reason Jessup died.
Yeah.
And he's not trying to say that Jessup didn't deserve it.
Yeah, I think this quote exemplifies what they were talking about. She's so angry that she has to do something violent. The book says, there were the mutters of beasts uncaged from women, and she sunk into a moaning place, kicked into silence.
Oh, that's so fucking good.
Right.
Yeah, none of the violence is shown on screen in the movie, which I really like.
Yeah, I don't think... I mean, it kind of is, just in that sense, but, like, it doesn't write out what happens during her beating. It's just that quote and then her waking up in the aftermath.
Yeah. I think there's one moment in the film, in her first interaction with Teardrop, where he grabs her by the hair to get her to shut up. But he doesn't hit her, so it's like
mild violence.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, it's still violent, but you know. But there's that, and then there's a brief thing when the women attack her, where it shows them like grab her. Well, Merib throws hot soup in her face, and then they grab her and they drag her out to a barn. And you hear Ree screaming, but you don't see anything. It just shows the aftermath of what they did to her. And then in the end, when they take her out to cut off Jessup's hands, they don't show that either.
Interesting.
Yeah, they play the sounds of the chainsaw cutting through bone.
Gross.
But it's played over shots of the trees or the lake or Ree's expression as she sort of detaches from the moment to get through it.
Interesting.
Never actually shows his body.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think you only even get like a glimpse of one of his cut off hands as they put it into a bag. So all of the violence is just told through atmosphere, the way so much else is in the story.
Yeah, I thought the atmosphere was really good.
I love the atmosphere.
The atmosphere. Well, I don't know if we said it before or after we started recording, but there's just really not much plot, really. It's very straightforward, and the real core of this story is the characterization and the setting and the atmosphere.
Yeah, and I think that they translated that to film really beautifully.
Good.
And even like it goes back to them portraying poverty as just a thing without demonizing it in any way. There was also a bit in the behind the scenes where it shows the director and I can't remember who, one of the members of the crew, I don't remember who it was exactly, but there's a tree where they're shooting that has a bunch of tires piled up around it. And they're like, this tree is just beautiful as a set piece that's just naturally occurring where they're shooting. And so they actually filmed certain scenes around this tree so that they could get the tree in the foreground as part of the setting.
Beautiful.
Yeah, with this, all these tires piled up around it. And again, it's like they approached it as this is a beautiful set piece, not as, ooh, we got to make sure we shoot all this junk piled up around this tree.
Yeah.
And I think that's so cool that it's like they shot the trees and the hills and all of that very lovingly, and just to show the beauty of the Ozarks, but then they also showed the human influence in the same sort of way, where it's like this tree now exists with these tires.
Yeah.
And that's just how the tree looks now, and that doesn't add or take away anything from the natural beauty of that tree.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a good story.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite films, so I'll never pass up a chance to watch it.
I'm definitely going to go find it because the book was really good. So
I had such a hard time finding it. Usually it's on Netflix this time of year, and I'm frankly angry that it's not. And I was trying to figure out where else I could watch it when my wife walked into the room and goes, "Don't we own it?" I literally just had it on a shelf, forgot that I owned it, and I was like,
beautiful.
Cool, that makes everything way easier.
Beautiful. Yeah, it was a good book. And I was kind of surprised because I do this all the time where I read a book title and decide what it's about for no reason. And then I'm disappointed when it's not that. And then the book has to work really hard to win me back, even though I did this to myself. So I don't know why, but I decided that it was a supernatural story, and it's not at all. And so when I realized that it's just set in the real world, I was like, "Aw." But so I was kind of surprised that I ended up liking it as much as I did because I'm an idiot, and the book had to win me back. But boy, did it!
Yeah, and probably largely because of the way that Daniel Woodrell writes about the Ozarks.
Yeah.
It reminds me of you.
I was just going to bring this up. Go ahead.
You said at one point, was it the Beldame Apocryphal? Am I remembering correctly?
Yes.
Yeah, that one of your favorite books, that the author wrote about a coastal town and very clearly was writing from the perspective of a person who grew up in the Pacific Northwest.
Yes.
And we grew up in the Pacific Northwest, so you just know the way that people write about coastlines.
Yeah.
You can tell whether they grew up here or not.
Yeah. And it's happened multiple times. There's that book. I don't remember the other one off the top of my head. Where they describe going to the coastline, and I'm like, this person's from the Pacific Northwest. And then, it was Three Dark Crowns, one of the sequels to that book. What's that woman's name?
You want me to look it up real quick?
Yes.
Three Dark Crowns.
She wrote Anna Dressed in Blood, too.
Oh, Kendar Blake.
Kendar Blake, that's it. She's from Kent.
Oh, okay. Kent, Washington, in case we have listeners.
Yeah.
We live in Washington.
Kent, Washington. And there's some scene where they go to the coast, and I'm like, this person's from the Pacific Northwest. And I'm right every time because you could tell.
You can tell. And it's got to be different from people who grow up on other coasts.
Well, here's the thing. In Authority, which is the sequel to Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer, he did not grow up here. But there's a scene where one of the characters drives to the Pacific Northwest specifically. And I'm like, you weren't born here. You're from Florida.
I don't even know if I could pinpoint what about it is different, but you can tell.
You can absolutely tell.
And I'm sure that that's true of distinct regions like the Ozarks. Yeah. I'm sure that Daniel Woodrell writes about it in a way that you can only write about it if you grew up there.
Yes.
And I love that. That's, I think, such an interesting glimpse into other places and other cultures.
Yeah. And just the way that where you grew up, how you grew up is stamped on you forever.
Yes. And it is such a different experience. I'm sure someone could write about a distinct region without having lived there.
Yes.
And get it right. But they're never going to get it so deeply correct that you feel it.
Yes.
Like I've never been to the Ozarks, but having read Winter's Bone, you feel something from the setting of that book.
Yeah.
That's different than if it had been written by someone who's not lived there.
Exactly.
Yep, it's a beautiful story, beautiful book, fantastic movie.
Well, I think we're just about out of talking points, yeah?
I think so. I do just want to say, I thought it would be neat, since I'm doing the movie portion of this most of the time. I wanted to give a couple of recommendations for people who have seen Winter's Bone and maybe liked the performances of specific actors.
Yeah.
Because I think John Hawkes, who played Teardrop, did just an absolute bang-up job. Just incredible. He embodies that character in such an amazing way. And he does a very similar performance, but it's almost like a polished up, similar type of character in Martha, Marcy May, Marlene, which I also think is a fantastic movie. And Dale Dickey, who played Merib, that I've mentioned her a few times, also fantastic. The only other thing I have seen her in was the Netflix series Unbelievable. She was in the Netflix series Unbelievable and also does a great job there. So if you've seen Winter's Bone and you liked John Hawkes or Dale Dickey, find them in those other medias.
Real quick.
Yes.
Does Teardrop have a giant scar on his face?
Not that I recall. He has a facial tattoo and he's got a neck tattoo.
Yeah, he has the Teardrop facial tattoos in the book, but he also has, she refers to it as the melted side of his face.
Oh, yeah, I do remember that from the book. It's not in the movie.
Okay, just curious.
No, he just looks haggard and wasted away in the movie.
Well, to your point of if you liked Winter's Bone, I would recommend Futuristic Violence in Fancy Suits. It's definitely tonally different. I don't know if you can tell from the title. It's a comedy. And there's a little bit of crass humor, which is not my favorite, but I liked it anyway. Very similar main character. I'm going to look up her name real quick.
Okay.
The book is by David Wong, who is one of my favorite authors, even though I don't generally enjoy comedy.
And he wrote John Dies at the End, which was an internet sensation like 10, 12 years ago.
Yeah. Zoe Ash is the main character of the book, and she's just very much... There's actually a lot of parallels now that I'm thinking about it. She's dealing with her dead father's legacy. She is kind of thrust into a situation where it's deal with it or die. It's very action hero. Yeah, it's just, I think it's a really good book, and aside from the comedy aspect, similar storyline.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I'm not going to read it because I don't like comedy, but...
That's fair.
But I can't wait to have a phone call at some point where you tell me all about it.
Oh my god, it's such a good book. The sequel just came out. I'm so excited.
We'll end this podcast and immediately get on the phone.
Yeah. So if you guys want to play along at home, next we are doing What Dreams May Come.
Yes. Which I'm also very excited for because it is another one of my favorite films.
I'm not super excited because I have actually read the book before and I remember it being like a major drag, but we'll see.
Why are we doing it then?
Because it'll be fun. It'll be a fun discussion. So
okay.
I'm Convokes most places. Jimmy the Deer Boy on Instagram and Twitter.
And I am Hella Lambs on Twitter and Instagram.
And catch you next time, Miltons and Jessups.
But not... What was the other name?
Arthur's or...
Shit, I was going to be so smooth and then I couldn't remember the name. Haslin? Was it Haslin?
Haslam.
Haslam. God damn it, I fucked it up.